Hello and welcome to Verbal to Visual. I'm your host, Doug Neill, and today I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite ideas from this book right here, Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts. Duke is a former professional poker player. She won over $4 million in tournaments. And prior to that, she went to graduate school for cognitive psychology. So she has a ton of personal experience in high-pressure decision-making situations, and also a lot of familiarity with the research behind how we make decisions. And what I would like to do today is sketch out some of my favorite ideas from that book with the goal of helping me put some of these ideas into use, and maybe the same for you. Let's start with my favorite metaphor from the book, that of a tree where the trunk represents everything that has happened in the past. And this transition point in between the trunk and the branches, this is where a decision is made. So this is what happens right now in the present, and that decision will result in one of a handful of possible outcomes that might then continue branching off to other outcomes. So each of these branches represent the potential outcomes. So this isn't a decision tree. It's not that you make this decision and then that decision and then that decision. It's an outcome tree. And the purpose of it is to represent the fact that from a single decision that you make, there are a variety of futures that might result from that singular decision, each of which has a certain probability of occurring. So what Duke wants to help us become throughout this book is more of a probabilistic thinker, which as human beings, we're not particularly built to think in probabilities. We're built to think in stories, in cause and effect. An example that Duke introduces early in the book and then references throughout it is from the world of football, specifically the playoffs in 2015, the Super Bowl between the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots, and Pete Carroll's now famous decision to call a pass play at the end of the game, just a few yards from the end zone, despite the fact that they had one of the best running backs in the league, Marshawn Lynch. And the result of that pass was an interception, and the Seahawks lost the Super Bowl. And for that decision, Carroll was universally derided by sports pundits and the public at large. I remember when that happened, particularly a meme that started with, "Hey Pete, you want to win another Super Bowl?" with the response, "Nah, I'll pass." So following that play, this outcome got a lot of attention. The outcome of an interception, the outcome of the Seahawks losing the Super Bowl. But as Duke points out, that particular outcome was only one of these branches. It's only one of the possible things that could have happened as a result of that play call. It could have resulted in a touchdown. If that had happened, Carroll would probably be lauded as one of the best coaches of all time. Everyone's going to expect him to run, and instead he calls a pass play, they score, and win the game. It, of course, could also have been an incomplete pass, which would have led to the opportunity to run probably 2 more plays, 3 in total, as opposed to likely just 2 plays that they could run if they decided to run first. Could have resulted in a sack, an offensive penalty, a defensive penalty, or an interception / fumble by the quarterback. By analyzing past performance, it was estimated that the probability of an interception being the result of this particular decision was only 2 to 3%. And if we make some other rough estimates here, maybe we could say that there's a 35% chance of it being an incomplete pass, let's say a 5% chance of a sack, maybe 10% chance of each of these penalties occurring, which would leave about a 37% chance of a touchdown. These might be a little off. There's probably a higher percentage of an incomplete than a touchdown. But roughly, this still shows the likelihood of something other than an interception occurring as a result of that decision to call a pass play. And when you take into account how quick a pass play is, and the fact that you would likely get 2 more plays after that, that makes Carroll's decision to call a pass play not that bad in retrospect, if you avoid some common reasoning errors that are easy for us to fall into as human beings. One of those reasoning errors is called resulting. This is where you tie too close of a thread between the outcome and the decision. Just because the outcome turned out bad, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a bad decision. Because with any decision that you make, there is some element of luck in how that will play out. So you can't place all the blame of a bad outcome on a bad decision, and similarly, you can't take all of the credit for a good outcome by calling that necessarily a good decision. There is still skill involved in decision making, but there's also luck. Another reasoning error that we often fall into is hindsight bias. This is when we take the perspective of the outcome that actually did occur and look backwards and have the sense that, oh, that outcome was inevitable. So with hindsight bias, what you're doing is you're chopping off all of the other branches on this tree because this one happens to be the result that we landed on. So one of the core ideas in this book, Thinking in Bets, is the idea that every decision that you make is itself a bet. You're making a decision, you're placing your chips on a particular decision, acknowledging that there is some probability that that will turn out well, but also some probability that it won't. Every decision is a bet. A bet where there's never going to be 100% certainty on how things are going to turn out. Where you can say to yourself, I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen, but I've got about 75% confidence that it's going to turn out okay. And even coming up with that number has a lot of benefits. It acknowledges the fact that there is a 25% chance that it won't turn out well, which can help you from beating yourself up if that's how things end up playing out. It also causes you to look more closely at the potential outcomes. By considering the various things that could happen, you might end up making a better decision in the first place. And you're just less likely to fall in the trap of black and white thinking around decisions being 100% good or 100% bad based on the particular outcome. Now, it can be hard to adopt this mindset of probabilistic thinking on your own and avoid these reasoning errors, which is why Duke encourages you to establish a learning pod. This is a group of people that you gather together to take a close look at the decisions that you're facing, at the common experience that you all are having. You take a look at the entirety of this tree in pursuit of the truth. So you're truth-seeking with others on the path toward better decisions. This truth-seeking piece is important because it goes against social norms. In our day-to-day lives, as we're talking with friends and family members about what happened that day, the decisions that we made, the things that turned out, we don't always necessarily want an in-depth view on everything that went into that decision and all of the potential outcomes, whether we're falling into these traps of resulting or hindsight bias. In lots of situations, we just need to vent. But there's a lot of value in gathering a group of people that isn't about venting, but instead having a more realistic view on the decision-making process to help you make better ones in the future. This connects to an idea in the book Thanks for the Feedback, which I sketched out a while back, acknowledging the distinction between an honest mirror and a supportive mirror. In a given situation, you need to know, is my role here to be supportive? Or is it to provide an honest view of the situation? More often than not, you're going to be in that supportive role. But you need situations where you can lift up that honest mirror to yourself, do some truth-seeking to get more at the core of what's actually going on. Duke refers to this as the buddy system, like on school field trips, helping each other not get lost, and encourages some specific operating procedures introduced by a psychologist named Robert Merton, a guy who coined the terms role model, self-fulfilling prophecy, reference group, unintended consequences, and focus group. He came up with this acronym of kudos to identify how these truth-seeking learning pods can operate. The C stands for communism, not the political form of it, but instead the idea that data belongs to the group, and the more data, the better. So don't leave out any of the uncomfortable details around the decision that you made, the glossing over of things that you do to preserve your self-image. We need all the info that we can get. The U is for universalism, which is about applying the same standards of evaluation no matter the source. You probably have heard the phrase, don't shoot the messenger. Don't punish the messenger when the message involves bad news. Universalism is the inverse of that. It's don't shoot the message just because you don't like the messenger. So in evaluating decision-making and reasoning, we're often too close-minded when we're taking in messages from a source that we don't like, and we're too trusting when taking in ideas from a source that we do like. A truth-seeking group also requires disinterestedness. This involves being vigilant about potential conflicts of interest, which we have a lot of built into how we work as human beings. We look for evidence that confirms our beliefs. We avoid admitting ignorance or error. We want to stack up well against others. We tend to take credit for good results, blame luck for bad results, and we desire to live in a world that makes sense. All of those things can be in conflict with seeking the truth. And here the group component is important because all of those conflicts of interest are easy to maintain individually, but harder to maintain when you have a diverse group of people analyzing a particular situation and a particular decision. And the last piece here, you need organized skepticism. This skepticism is about allowing for dissent, about exploring why the thing that was just proposed might not be true, perhaps assigning someone as a devil's advocate to argue against whatever the current line of reasoning is. So these are techniques that can help you maintain more of a probabilistic mindset as you analyze your past decisions. And even just knowing that you maybe have to bring your decisions to this group, that's going to help you make better decisions in the first place. You will be held accountable for the decision you're about to make. But there are some things that you can do on your own as well by engaging in some mental time traveling. What we've already seen from this tree diagram here is a more holistic representation of the present, the past, and the potential future. Mental time travel takes that a step further and encourages you to bring not just your present self into the decision-making process, but instead encourages you to acknowledge both your future self and your past self. So your present self is engaged in this question of what should I do? You're facing a particular situation. You have to make a decision. Mental time travel encourages you to not make that decision on your own. Take into account both your past self, who's had plenty of experiences in the world. What would your past self have to say? But then, perhaps even more powerful, don't ignore your future self. Don't forget that your decisions right now are going to have an impact on your future self. Bring that future self into the decision-making process. Here, Duke brings in a comedic bit from Jerry Seinfeld, who talks about Night Jerry, the person who wants to stay up late, watching shows, drinking, eating junk food. That's the present self. That's Night Jerry. Morning Jerry is the person who wakes up the next day, groggy, hungover, feeling crappy. Morning Jerry hates Night Jerry because Night Jerry only cares about how it feels to do the things he's doing right now, not considering the future implications. And while it might be common to have the sense of, ooh, I'm going to regret this decision, I think there's something different about actively bringing this future self into your awareness, almost having a conversation with that person and asking yourself, what's the probability that my future self is going to be happy about the decision that I make right now? What's the probability of a good outcome as opposed to a bad one? So that's one form of mental time travel, having active conversations both with your past self, who has experienced some things and maybe has some guesses about what's going to happen, and your future self, who has something to say about what might happen, who is more invested in that decision than perhaps you are right now. There are a couple of other kind of specific planning activities that you can take on, one of which focuses on the positive outcome that you might be hoping will result. One thing that you can do is work back from that positive result and try to determine, okay, what are the steps or conditions necessary in order to bring about that positive result? Duke uses the term backcasting to describe that process. I feel like backwards planning is another way to describe this. You imagine the desired outcome and work your way back from there so that you know how to move forward. The flip side of that is actively imagining the negative outcome occurring and even assuming that that is the outcome, that it's going to be a negative one, and do a pre-mortem as opposed to a post-mortem. You don't wait for the bad thing to occur to analyze it. You assume that the bad thing will occur and then can look at both what were the causes of that bad thing and what might we do in response to it, so that you can both help to prevent it, but then also you have a plan for responding to it if it occurs. In the case of an interception as the final play in the Super Bowl, there's not much you can do to respond to that. But in most cases, the negative outcomes that occur in our life, they're not the end of the story. You're in the middle of it, and you will get to decide what to do next. And this approach of thinking in bets, of taking on more of a probabilistic way of viewing the world, helps remove some of the emotional anguish around the decisions you make. It helps you acknowledge the truth of the situation, that what happens in life is a combination of luck and skill, that a bad outcome is not necessarily tied to a bad decision, nor is a good outcome necessarily tied to a good decision, that there are a variety of futures that can occur after any single decision is made, that we can work with others to achieve a more truthful, unbiased view of the situation, and also that we can consider our future self and our past self to make better decisions in this particular moment. There is so much more in this book to dig into, so if you enjoyed the ideas that I shared here, I encourage you to pick up the book and read it yourself. I hope it was helpful to see the ideas sketched out in this way. If this skill of sketching out ideas is one that you would like to develop, that is a skill that I teach. And you can find resources to get you started down that path at verbaltovisual.com. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck in the decisions that you will be making later today, throughout this week, in the months to come. And I look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Till next time.